The heavy envelope felt like a feather in my hands, yet it carried the weight of 7 years. 7 years of early mornings, late nights, cheap instant coffee, and meals eaten on the go. 7 years of managing 2 demanding jobs, one as a bookkeeper for a small construction firm and another part-time at a local diner, just to make ends meet and, more importantly, to keep a roof over our heads. My own head, Clara's head, and ever since he moved in, Marcus's head too. At 64, my body ached in places I never knew existed. My spirit often felt threadbare. But this envelope promised an end to that particular exhaustion. It was the paid-in-full letter for the mortgage. The house was mine. Finally. Truly mine. After all this time and sacrifice, a surge of triumphant relief, potent and sweet, washed over me, chasing away the pervasive weariness. I clutched the letter, my heart pounding with a joy I hadn't felt in decades, a youthful buoyancy I thought long lost. I couldn't wait to share the news. My daughter, Clara, and her husband, Marcus, were in the living room, as they usually were on a Tuesday afternoon. Clara was scrolling on her phone, a distant look in her eyes, while Marcus, true to form, was sprawled across the sofa, remote control resting on his chest, a half-eaten bag of chips beside him. The television blared some daytime show, a testament to their perpetual leisure. "Clara! Marcus! Look!" I exclaimed, my voice a little breathless, waving the letter like a flag of victory. "It's done! The house is finally paid off!" Clara glanced up, her expression unchanging, her eyes barely registering my excitement. Her words were flat, devoid of any warmth, a stark contrast to the effervescent joy bubbling within me. It was like throwing a pebble into a vast, still lake, hardly a ripple. My smile faltered slightly, but I quickly pushed the disappointment down. Perhaps she hadn't grasped the significance. Marcus, however, decided to interject, his voice thick with a sarcasm that grated on my ears. He shifted slightly on the sofa, a smirk playing on his lips. Well, look who finally finished paying for our house." He emphasized our, as if he'd contributed anything more than the weight of his body on my cushions. The comment stung, a reminder of the imbalance, of years of their comfortable idleness while I toiled. "Yes, it's done," I said, trying to regain some of my earlier enthusiasm. "We should celebrate. Maybe a nice dinner out, my treat?" I hoped to steer the mood away from Marcus's unpleasantness, to usher in a moment of shared happiness for this milestone. But Marcus merely pushed himself up, a sudden seriousness replacing his usual languor. He took the remote, muted the television, and sat forward, his gaze fixed on me with an unsettling intensity. "Actually, Eleanor," he began, using my first name in that formal, condescending way he adopted when he wanted to sound important. "We need to have a serious conversation. Don't we, Clara?" Clara, who had finally put her phone down, nodded, her face now completely devoid of emotion, a cold mask that sent a shiver down my spine. "Yes, Mom, we do." She paused, took a shallow breath, and then continued, her voice as detached as a stranger's. "It's about your retirement. And moving somewhere more appropriate." I blinked, my mind scrambled, trying to process her words. "Retirement? Moving? Appropriate for what? What are you talking about, Clara? This is my home. I've lived here for 23 years. I just paid it off." The confusion was a heavy fog, making it hard to think clearly, to comprehend the sudden shift in atmosphere. My heart, so recently soaring, began to plummet. Marcus leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his eyes narrowed. "Exactly. You just paid it off. Now it's time for you to, enjoy your golden years. Somewhere that makes more sense." He gestured vaguely, dismissively, as if waving away an inconvenient fly. "Somewhere that makes more sense?" I repeated, a tremor entering my voice. "What is more appropriate, Marcus?" The words tasted bitter in my mouth. Then he dropped the bomb, his tone chillingly casual, as if discussing the weather. "Great. Now go live in the dump." The blood drained from my face. I looked from Marcus to Clara, searching for some sign of a joke, a misunderstanding, anything to soften the blow. But Clara's expression remained stony, resolute. "He's right, Mom," she said, her voice laced with an icy finality. "You always were a burden. We need our space. You've done your part." The world tilted. The floor beneath my feet seemed to shift, the very air in my own kitchen growing thin and sharp. A burden? The word was a whisper, raw and choked, struggling past the sudden lump in my throat. My daughter, my only child, the one I had worked tirelessly for, sacrificed everything for, now saw me as a burden, a completed transaction to be filed away. The years of love, of care, of endless effort dissolved into nothingness under the weight of her cruel pronouncement. My mind reeled. They didn't see me as a mother, a person who loved them, who had given them sanctuary. They saw me as a means to an end, a live-in maid and, more critically, a perpetual mortgage payer. Now that the mortgage was gone, paid in full by my weary hands, I was obsolete, disposable. A sudden, profound loneliness enveloped me, so vast and cold it felt like a physical ache in my chest. I stood in my own kitchen, surrounded by the familiar scent of old wood and simmering dinner. Yet I was utterly, terribly, alone. But beneath the crushing wave of heartbreak, a different sensation began to stir. A tiny, insidious tendril of coldness, sharp and calculating, began to weave through the pain. It was a clarity, an icy realization. They were so consumed by their own entitlement, so blinded by their perceived victory, that they had overlooked something crucial. And in that moment, standing there, shattered and betrayed, I knew I would find out what it was. That night, sleep was an impossible luxury. The words burden and dump echoed in my mind, each syllable a fresh stab wound. I retreated to my small bedroom, the one I had furnished with hand-me-downs and thrift store finds, while Clara's room always boasted the newest trends. I pulled out old photo albums, their worn covers familiar beneath my trembling fingers. Pages of faded memories stared back at me. Clara, as a baby, a toddler, a bright-eyed girl. I traced her smiling face, my heart aching with a grief so profound it felt physical. Where had I gone wrong? How had the path from this loving little girl to the cold woman in my living room become so twisted? My journey as a mother began under a shadow. Clara's father, David, my loving husband, had died in a car accident just weeks before she was born. I was 27, adrift in a sea of grief, but the tiny flutter in my belly, the life growing within me, anchored me. I vowed then and there that Clara would never feel the absence of a father, that she would never go without, a promise that became the driving force of my life. I worked tirelessly. I juggled 2 jobs for most of Clara's childhood, a secretary during the day, a cleaner at night. Every extra hour, every missed social event, every worn-out pair of shoes was for her. I wanted to give her the world, or at least my small, safe corner of it. When she turned 16, and all her friends were getting shiny new cars, I heard her wistful sighs. So, I picked up extra shifts at the diner, serving coffee and wiping down counters until my feet throbbed, saving every spare dollar. After months, I surprised her with a used Honda Civic, its paint a little faded but mechanically sound. Her face, alight with joy, was worth every ache, every sacrifice. "You're the best mom ever!" she'd shrieked, throwing her arms around me. Those words were my fuel, my reward. Then came the letter from State University. Clara had been accepted. My heart swelled with pride. This was it. Her ticket to a better life. A life free from the struggles I had known. But tuition, books, dorm fees, it was more than I could manage with just 2 jobs. So, I took on a third. My schedule became a relentless grind. Up at 4 a.m. to clean offices from 5 a.m. to 9 a.m., then straight to the nursing home for a shift from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m., helping the elderly with their daily needs, sharing moments of quiet companionship. Weekends were often filled with extra shifts or freelance bookkeeping for small businesses. I rarely saw daylight during the week, my life a blur of fluorescent lights and hushed hallways. But Clara was thriving at college, making friends, getting good grades. My exhaustion was a small price to pay. It was during her junior year that she brought Marcus home for a holiday break. He was tall, handsome, in a conventional way, with a confident, almost arrogant, air about him. He had a business degree, Clara proudly declared, and big plans. I tried. Truly, I did. To like him. I saw how smitten Clara was, and that was enough for me to overlook his tendency to sprawl on the sofa, making no effort to help with dishes or even hold a conversation beyond a few monosyllabic grunts. He spoke grandly of his business ideas, vague concepts that always ended with him needing seed money or investors. Clara, bless her naive heart, believed in him implicitly, convinced he was a genius on the cusp of untold success. He just needs the right opportunity, Mom, she'd say, her eyes shining with unwavering faith. They graduated and, as expected, Marcus's grand business ideas failed to materialize. Just a temporary setback, Mom, Clara assured me. He'll land something big. They decided to move in with me, temporarily, until they saved enough for their own place. 5 years later, they were still here. Marcus's job search was sporadic, punctuated by long stretches of unemployment. Every potential job offer, no matter how decent, was met with a litany of complaints. It's not worthy of my degree, or the commute is too long, or the pay is insulting. Meanwhile, I continued working, silently shouldering the burden of supporting 3 adults on my 2 paltry salaries. Clara had found a part-time job as an administrative assistant, which covered her personal expenses, but contributed little to the household. My dream of easing into retirement, of perhaps finally traveling a little, faded with each passing month. Their wedding was a modest affair in our backyard. Clara's choice, she said, to keep it intimate. Marcus's parents, a well-heeled couple from the city, arrived in a gleaming black sedan, their expressions a study in barely concealed disdain. They made polite but pointed remarks about the size of my house, the quaint neighborhood, and the charming simplicity of the decorations. I overheard Marcus's mother whisper to a distant relative about poor Eleanor having to shoulder everything. It was a fleeting sting, overshadowed by the sight of Clara's radiant smile as she said her vows. I thought, perhaps, their presence in my home would be a short one, that Marcus would finally find his footing, and they would move on to build their own life. I was wrong. The years bled into one another, marked by the steady rhythm of my work, the quiet hum of the washing machine, and the ever-present drone of the television from the living room. I bought the groceries, paid the bills, cleaned the house, fixed what broke. I was a phantom in my own home, my presence taken for granted, my efforts unseen. I cooked their meals, listened to their complaints about the world, and offered unwavering support, always with the hope that one day they would see me, truly see me, and appreciate what I had done. But that day never came. Instead, the paid-in-full letter, meant to be a moment of triumph, had become the catalyst for my eviction. As I closed the photo album, a new feeling solidified within me, replacing the gut-wrenching pain. It was a stark, bitter clarity. They hadn't just asked me to leave. They had discarded me. An old, worn-out tool, no longer needed. And in that clarity, the cold, calculating kernel that had started to form earlier now began to sprout. I had spent a lifetime giving, sacrificing, without ever asking for anything in return. Now, it was time to collect. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. My children, my own flesh and blood, saw me not as a person, but as a utility, a resource. And like any resource, I was to be exploited until depleted, then cast aside. This cold, hard truth settled deep in my bones as the first light of dawn crept through my bedroom window. The need for a third job had become critical during Clara's final year of college. The mortgage payments, even with my 2 steady incomes, were barely manageable, especially with the added expenses of supporting a college student. I remember the day I decided to take on private house cleaning. It was a Tuesday, my one day off between shifts, and I spent it scrubbing toilets and polishing floors in a sprawling mansion on the other side of town. The family who lived there were rarely home, but their opulent lifestyle was evident in every pristine corner. They had a weekly catering service that left gourmet leftovers in the fridge, enough food to feed my family for days, yet they casually discarded it. The irony was a bitter pill. I cleaned their gold-plated faucets and marble floors for less than they spent on a single lunch. The physical exhaustion was immense, but the humiliation was worse. Each scrub, each polished surface, was a testament to my diminished circumstances, a quiet acknowledgement of how far I'd fallen from the dreams I once held. Yet, Clara and Marcus remained utterly oblivious. Money, in their minds, simply appeared. My weary sighs, my aching back, the dark circles under my eyes. They never noticed. Or if they did, they simply ignored it. They never once asked how I was managing, or if they could help. Their concerns were always about themselves, their comfort, their desires, their demands, subtle at first, grew bolder, more entitled. "Mom, the cable's just too slow for Marcus's gaming," Clara would say, her tone implying that my budget internet was a personal affront to Marcus's digital ambitions. "He needs faster speeds to really compete." And so, the cable package was upgraded, adding another $60 to my already strained monthly bills. Then came the bathroom. "We really need to renovate our bathroom, Mom," Marcus declared one evening, gesturing dismissively at the perfectly functional, if dated, tiles. "It's embarrassing when our friends come over. Our bathroom, our house, everything, suddenly, was ours." Despite the fact that I was the one working 3 jobs to pay for every single screw, every single kilowatt of electricity, every single drop of water, I watched Clara transform, slowly, subtly. The sweet, caring daughter I knew seemed to fade, replaced by a version of herself who mimicked Marcus's casual disrespect. Her voice, once soft and empathetic, now carried an edge of impatience when she spoke to me. She'd roll her eyes at my old-fashioned ways, or cut me off mid-sentence to agree with Marcus. It was as if she had absorbed his entitlement, making it her own. The realization that I was losing her, that Marcus was actively undermining my relationship with my own child, was a constant, dull ache in my heart. There were moments, brief and fleeting, when I'd try to gently suggest they find their own place. "Don't you think it's time you two started looking for an apartment?" I'd ventured once, my voice carefully neutral. Clara's response had been swift and dismissive, tinged with a feigned concern that pulled at my vulnerable heartstrings. "Oh, Mom, you wouldn't want us to leave, would you? You'd be so lonely. Besides," she'd added, a practiced sigh escaping her lips, "Marcus is still trying to get his business off the ground. We need to save every penny. And then, the kicker. You always said you wanted to help us achieve our dreams." She was right. I had said that, and the thought of being truly alone, of this house echoing with only my footsteps, filled me with a primal fear. David had died so young, leaving me a widow before I was even 30. The idea of navigating old age in solitude, after a lifetime of giving, was terrifying. So, I tolerated the illusion of family, the constant presence, even if it meant being treated as an unpaid servant. I convinced myself that having them here, even in this diminished capacity, was better than being completely by myself. I enabled them. I see that now. My fear of loneliness had made me blind, made me complicit in my own slow erosion. They had become adept at exploiting my fear, my desire to keep my family close, even if that family treated me with contempt. They saw my sacrifices as their due, my house as their inheritance, me as an ATM and a maid. And now, with the mortgage finally paid off, they saw no further use for the ATM or the maid. I was to be discarded. But in their arrogance, in their utter conviction that they had outmaneuvered me, they had made one crucial, colossal mistake. They had been so focused on what they believed was theirs that they overlooked a very important question. A question about legalities, about ownership, about the true nature of the transaction they thought was complete. And I, Eleanor Vance, was about to ask it. The morning light, usually a gentle comfort, felt harsh and unforgiving. I woke with a strange clarity, the emotional storm of the previous night having receded, leaving behind a cold, desolate landscape. The pain was still there, a dull throb beneath my ribs, but it was now accompanied by a sense of detachment, as if I were observing my own life from a great distance. The years of quiet sacrifice, the creeping erosion of respect, the stark realization of their entitlement. It all coalesced into a single, unshakable truth. I rose, went through the motions of my morning routine, and made coffee. The aroma filled the kitchen, a stark contrast to the silence in the rest of the house. Clara and Marcus were still asleep, oblivious, no doubt, to the seismic shift that had occurred within me. I prepared breakfast for myself, a simple piece of toast, and ate it slowly, listening to the quiet tick of the clock. This was their routine. They always slept in, emerging only when the scent of coffee and my presence in the kitchen signaled that their day could begin without much effort on their part. Around 9 o'clock, Marcus finally ambled into the kitchen, his hair disheveled, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He yawned, stretched, and then, without so much as a glance at me, opened the pantry door. "Hey, Eleanor," he mumbled, his voice thick with morning gruffness. "Is there any of that good cereal left? The honey clusters?" My blood ran cold. That good cereal. The same man who had, less than 24 hours ago, told me to go live in the dump, was now audaciously asking for his preferred breakfast, expecting me to cater to his whims. A flicker of the old me, the dutiful mother, the accommodating presence, might have simply told him where to find it. But that version of Eleanor Vance was gone, incinerated in the fires of their betrayal. I felt a steely resolve harden within me. I turned from the sink, my expression carefully neutral. Clara, drawn by Marcus's voice, appeared in the doorway, scrolling on her phone. It was time. "So," I began, my voice calm, almost unnervingly so. "When exactly were you planning to tell me about your plans for the house?" Marcus froze, his hand still inside the cereal box. Clara's thumb paused mid-scroll. They exchanged a quick, furtive glance, a silent communication that spoke volumes. It confirmed my suspicions. This hadn't been a spur-of-the-moment decision. This had been discussed, planned, plotted, all behind my back. "Plans?" Marcus stammered, trying to feign ignorance, though his eyes betrayed him. "What plans, Eleanor?" Clara, ever the slightly more articulate one, stepped forward. "Mom, we were just talking about the future. That's all. Nothing's set in stone." Her voice, though attempting reassurance, sounded brittle, defensive. "The future," I repeated, letting the word hang in the air, laden with unspoken meaning. "The future where I move to somewhere more appropriate, perhaps? A retirement community? Or a small apartment, as you suggested?" My gaze flickered between them, unyielding. "And where, pray tell, would I get the money for such an arrangement? I've just spent the last 7 years working 2, sometimes 3, jobs, paying off this house. Every last penny of my savings, every ounce of my energy, went into that mortgage." Marcus, emboldened by Clara's presence, straightened up, a flicker of his usual arrogance returning. "Well, that's what we were discussing, Eleanor. We figured you could use your share of the house sale." He delivered the words with the air of a benevolent benefactor, as if he were offering me a generous gift rather than stealing my home out from under me. "My share?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, though it felt like a shout in my ears. The coldness in my chest intensified, a growing glacier. Clara chimed in, rushing to fill the silence. "Yes, Mom. We think it's a good idea. The market is strong right now. We could sell this place, and you'd have a nice nest egg to find a smaller place, somewhere you can relax. And Marcus and I?" She paused, her eyes gleaming with an uncharacteristic excitement. "We could finally get into a better neighborhood. A place with more space. A yard. Something for our future family." The full scope of their treachery unfurled before me, stark and sickening. They weren't just asking me to leave. They were planning to liquidate my entire life, my home, the only true asset I had, to fund their own upward mobility. My home, the one I had poured every ounce of my being into, was merely a stepping stone for them, a financial instrument to be cashed out and reinvested for their benefit. And my share? A pittance, I suspected, just enough to get me out of their way, to ensure I was no longer a burden. I looked at Clara, my daughter, the little girl I had sworn to protect, to cherish. Her face was alight with dreams of a bigger house, a better life, a future family. A future that had no room for me. The very person who had made all of it possible. There was no remorse, no flicker of empathy in her eyes, only a disturbing blend of excitement and a quiet, almost imperceptible, sense of triumph. It was as if I was no longer her mother, but a necessary obstacle, soon to be removed. The bewilderment was so profound it left me speechless, a gaping wound in my soul. They truly saw me as nothing more than a transaction, now complete and ready for disposal. The air in the kitchen crackled with an unspoken tension, thick and suffocating. My daughter, my son-in-law, stood before me, their faces a mixture of defensiveness and a bizarre self-righteousness. I needed to hear it again, stripped of their vague euphemisms. So, let me be absolutely clear, I said, my voice dangerously calm, the words precise, each one landing with deliberate force. You want me to move out of my home? The home I've lived in for 23 years? The home I just paid off with my own 2 hands? So you can sell it and use the money to buy a different house for yourselves? I looked directly at Clara, my heart aching for the girl she used to be. Clara flinched, her eyes darting away from mine, but she quickly recovered, a defensive edge creeping into her voice. Mom, it's not like that. We're thinking about you too. You're getting older. This house is a lot of maintenance. It's time for you to relax, to have less responsibility. She gestured around the kitchen, as if the very walls were conspiring against my well-being. Maintenance? I scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. I've handled this house for 23 years. Every leaky faucet, every broken window, every patch of peeling paint. I've taken care of it. And for the past 5 years, I've taken care of it. And the 2 of you, working 3 jobs, without a single complaint. Marcus, ever ready to interject with his patronizing wisdom, stepped forward. Exactly, Eleanor. See? You've worked so hard. It's time for you to put your feet up. Relax. Let us handle the grown-up stuff. He puffed out his chest slightly, as if the concept of handling grown-up stuff was a foreign, yet appealing, notion he had just discovered. My gaze was unwavering. Grown-up stuff? I challenged him, a tremor running through my voice. Not of fear, but of barely contained fury. What grown-up stuff? Marcus, have either of you contributed a single dollar to the mortgage, to the property taxes, to the insurance? To any of the actual grown-up stuff that keeps a roof over our heads? Clara, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation, interjected. Mom, don't be so dramatic. We would give you a fair share. Of course we would. We're not monsters. Her tone was dismissive, as if my emotional response was an inconvenience, an overreaction to a perfectly logical business decision. I turned my back to them, walking to the kitchen window. My eyes drifted past the overgrown rose bushes, past the wobbly wooden fence, to the small patch of lawn where a faded, weather-beaten swing set stood. I remembered assembling it myself, screwdriver in hand, following diagrams late into the night, my pregnant belly heavy, determined that Clara would have a place to play, a place to dream. It had been her sanctuary, and mine too, in those early, lonely years. Now, it was just an old relic, a testament to a love that felt utterly unreciprocated. I took a deep breath, turning back to face them. My voice was softer now, tinged with a profound sadness. When you look at me, I asked, my gaze piercing, searching for something, anything. In their eyes, what do you see? They stammered, caught off guard by the raw vulnerability of the question. Marcus mumbled, someone who's worked really hard. Eleanor, Clara added, almost robotically, someone who loves us. Their answers were hollow, lacking conviction, rehearsed platitudes that meant nothing. They saw me, but they didn't see me. No, I stated, the word hanging heavy in the air. You see someone who's served her purpose. You see someone who has completed her transaction. Someone who is disposable. The word felt like a brand on my tongue, burning with the truth of it. Marcus's face contorted in agitation. He couldn't handle the emotional truth, the directness of my pain. That's ridiculous, Eleanor. Don't be so dramatic. Nobody thinks you're disposable. This is just life. People move on. You need to move on. His voice was rising, cracking with irritation, clearly uncomfortable with being confronted with the cold mirror of his own actions. Clara remained silent, her eyes fixed on the floor, allowing her husband to verbally dismantle her mother, to tell me, in essence, to figure out my own homelessness. Her silence was louder than any words, a chilling confirmation of her complicity, her complete lack of empathy. The anger flared within me, a sudden, hot burst, quickly extinguished by the cold, calculated clarity that had settled in my mind. Their timeline wasn't a suggestion for my well-being. It was a deadline for my eviction. A deadline I was supposed to meet without question, without protest. But they had miscalculated. They had assumed I was too old, too tired, too broken to fight back. They were wrong. This wasn't just my house. This was my life. And I was about to remind them exactly whose name was on the deed, whose name was on that paid-in-full letter. The game, I realized, was far from over. It had just begun. The silence that followed my accusation of feeling disposable was heavy, punctuated only by the distant chirping of birds. Marcus eventually broke it, his agitation escalating into open frustration. Eleanor, this is getting ridiculous. We're offering you a fair deal, a chance to relax, a comfortable future. He paced the small kitchen, running a hand through his already messy hair. When you die, everything becomes hers anyway. We're just trying to make the transition easier, to streamline things. The words hit me like a physical blow, sharper and more brutal than any insult about being a burden or my house being a dump. When you die? He spoke of my eventual demise not with sorrow, not with even a pretense of familial concern, but as a simple logistical problem, a final hurdle to overcome before they could fully claim what they believed was theirs. My life, my death, reduced to a mere transition, a bureaucratic formality. The cold, calculating feeling that had been stirring within me solidified into an unyielding resolve. I said nothing, but walked over to the kitchen desk, a small, worn piece of furniture where I kept important household papers. From a bottom drawer, I retrieved a manila folder, thick with documents. My hands were steady as I pulled out the contents: the official property deed, several years of property tax records, and a stack of recent bank statements. I walked back to the kitchen table, where their breakfast bowls still sat, untouched, and laid the papers out methodically, smoothing them with an almost ceremonial grace. Marcus stopped pacing, his eyes narrowing, a flicker of apprehension in their depths. Clara watched, her phone forgotten on the counter, a faint crease of confusion on her brow. I pointed to the top document, the deed, my finger tracing the embossed seal. The house, I stated, my voice clear and unwavering, is in my name. Only my name. Marcus, ever quick with a dismissive retort, let out a short, incredulous laugh. Of course, it's in your name, Eleanor. You bought it. We know that. His laughter, however, died abruptly as the full implication of my words registered. Slowly, sickeningly, his eyes scanned the documents, searching for something, anything, that contradicted my statement. He found nothing. Clara, her face pale, stared at the deed. But Mom, she began, her voice small, almost childlike, a stark contrast to her earlier dismissiveness. I assumed, we talked about this being for us, for the family. Legally, financially, officially, I clarified, looking from Clara to Marcus, my gaze unyielding. This house belongs to me, and only me. There are no other names on this deed. There are no other names on these tax records. There are no other names on the mortgage payments that have been made for the past 23 years, culminating in that paid-in-full letter yesterday. I tapped the bank statements. Every single payment, every repair, Every utility bill has come from my accounts. I paused, allowing the weight of my words to sink in. And as for when I die, I met Marcus's gaze, a chilling calm in my voice that is also entirely up to me. Without a will specifically naming Clara as the beneficiary of this property, the state will decide its fate, which is a lengthy and expensive process. And even with a will, I continued, emphasizing the word, I am free to choose anyone I wish to inherit my assets. Clara, a charity, a distant relative, even a complete stranger. The color drained from their faces, leaving them ashen. Marcus's jaw dropped, his earlier confidence evaporating, replaced by a dawning horror. Clara's eyes, wide and unblinking, stared at the documents, at the stark, undeniable proof of my sole ownership. Their grand plan, their carefully constructed narrative of entitlement, their assumption that my death was merely a convenient transition, crumbled before their very eyes, dissolving into dust. The house, their golden ticket to a better neighborhood, was not, and never had been, theirs to sell. In the past, I had always intended for everything to go to Clara. She was my daughter, my only child. It was a given. An unspoken certainty that had underpinned my entire life's work. My will, drafted years ago, had unequivocally named her as my sole heir. But the Clara of that will, the loving daughter I had envisioned, was not the cold, calculating woman who stood before me now, complicit in her husband's casual disregard for my life. That version of Clara no longer existed, and with her disappearance, so too vanished my unquestioning generosity. The betrayal had severed that tie, replaced it with a cold, hard space where love used to be. And in that space, a new resolve took root. The shock on their faces was almost comical, a mirror image of my own heartbreak from the previous evening. Marcus stammered, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. Clara's eyes, still wide, flickered between the deed and me, as if searching for a hidden clause, a loophole. Then, the inevitable apologies began to spill out, hollow and desperate. "Mom, I'm so sorry, we didn't mean it like that," Clara cried, her voice trembling. We thought we were helping." "Helping?" I cut her off, my voice sharp, leaving no room for their carefully constructed lies. "You meant it exactly like that. You called me a burden. You told me to go live in a dump. You discussed my death as a convenient transition for your benefit. Don't insult my intelligence by pretending otherwise." Marcus, recovering slightly, tried a different tack, attempting to regain some semblance of control. Okay. Maybe we handled it poorly, but we should have discussed this as a family. We should have included you in the planning of your displacement." The word displacement felt like a euphemism for homelessness, delivered with a smugness that reignited my anger. "My displacement?" I repeated, a dangerous edge to my voice. "And what, exactly, did you assume I would want as part of this displacement plan, Marcus?" I pressed him, watching him squirm. He hesitated, clearly flustered. "Well, you know, whatever you wanted." I looked at Clara, who still seemed shell-shocked. "Clara," I prompted, "what do I want?" She swallowed hard, her voice barely a whisper. What do you want, Mom?" This was it. My moment. The accumulated frustrations of years, the unspoken resentments, the endless sacrifices, coalesced into a clear, concise statement of my needs. "I want to live in my home," I stated, my voice strong, resonating with a newfound authority. "I want to be treated with respect, as a person, not a disposable resource. I want to make my own decisions about my life and my future, and I absolutely, unequivocally, refuse to be treated like a burden in my own house, in my own life." Clara immediately jumped in, a flicker of her old, manipulative self returning. "Of course, Mom. We'll treat you with respect. We promise." But the words sounded hollow, brittle, echoing the many broken promises of the past. I ignored her. My gaze remained fixed on Marcus. "And as for handling the grown-up stuff, Marcus, Who exactly do you expect to shoulder the financial burden of this household? You've been unemployed for 8 months, and Clara's part-time job barely covers her personal expenses. Do you envision a scenario where the house mysteriously pays for itself? Or do you still expect the burden to continue working 3 jobs well into her supposed retirement? Clara, unable to tolerate the direct challenge to their carefully constructed reality, slammed her empty coffee mug onto the counter, the clatter echoing in the sudden silence. "Mom, that's mean. You're attacking us," she cried, her voice rising in pitch, a familiar whine entering her tone. "I'm not being mean, Clara," I corrected her, my voice unwavering. "I'm stating facts. I'm pointing out that your grand plan for my future involves me sacrificing my home and my security so you can benefit. That's not a family plan. That's exploitation." Marcus's mask of benevolent concern finally fell away, revealing the naked aggression beneath. His face flushed red, his hands clenching into fists. "Fine," he snarled, his voice thick with contempt. "If you're going to be so difficult about it, then it's time for you to move on, Eleanor. We can't live like this." "Oh, I agree wholeheartedly," I replied, a chilling smile touching my lips. "It is indeed time for someone to move on." I paused, letting the implication hang in the air, then delivered my ultimatum. "Let's be very clear about the new rules. This is my house. I paid for it. I own it. And I am staying in it." I looked from Marcus to Clara, my eyes hard. "If you don't like those terms, then you are more than welcome to make other arrangements. Effective immediately." Marcus stared at me, dumbfounded. You can't kick us out," he sputtered, his voice incredulous. "We have rights. We've lived here for 5 years." "No, Marcus," I stated, shaking my head slowly, deliberately. "You don't have rights. Not here. You are not on the lease. You are not on the deed. You have never contributed to the mortgage, the taxes, or any significant household expenses. Legally, you are house guests. And as the owner of this house, I have every right to ask my house guests to leave. At any time. For any reason." Clara, who had been listening in stunned silence, finally burst into tears. But these tears were different. They weren't the manipulative, strategic tears I had grown accustomed to over the years. These were genuine, born of fear and a dawning realization that her safety net, her free ride, was about to be snatched away. And for the first time in a long time, I felt nothing. No pity, no urge to comfort, just a cold, resolute determination. The ball was now in their court, and I wasn't backing down. Clara's tears flowed freely now, her face blotchy and red. They weren't the silent, strategic tears she'd used in the past to deflect criticism or manipulate a desired outcome. These were loud, messy sobs, born of genuine fear, a raw, unvarnished display of vulnerability. It was a shift, subtle but undeniable, and for a fleeting moment, a flicker of the old Eleanor, the nurturing mother, stirred within me. But the cold clarity quickly returned, tempering any softening. "Mom," Clara choked out between sobs. How did things get so complicated? I don't understand." I looked at her, then at Marcus, who stood rigidly, his face still red with indignation, though the bluster had left him. "Things became complicated, Clara," I explained, my voice steady. "When you stopped seeing me as your mother and started seeing me as a financial system, when you allowed Marcus to disrespect me, to call me a burden, and to talk about my home as if it were a commodity to be sold for your benefit, when you forgot that family means care, mutual respect, and contribution, not just taking," Marcus scoffed, a desperate attempt to regain some footing. "So, you're just going to throw your own family out on the street over hurt feelings?" "No, Marcus," I corrected him calmly. "I am setting boundaries. I am an adult who expects to be treated with dignity in my own home. And you two," I looked pointedly at both of them, "are capable adults who need to take responsibility for your own lives. That is not throwing you out. That is expecting you to act like grown-ups." Then I turned back to Clara, meeting her tear-filled eyes. "Clara, I want you to truly think about what you want. Not what Marcus tells you to want, not what you feel entitled to, but what genuinely makes you happy, what kind of life you want to build, and what kind of daughter you want to be. Her sobs lessened, replaced by shaky breaths. I want us to be a family again. Mom, she whispered, her voice cracking. I want us to care about each other. Like we used to. A profound sadness settled over me. I want that too, Clara. But a family cannot be built on one person's endless sacrifice and the other's constant taking. It has to be built on respect, on mutual support, not on dependency. I paused, allowing my words to sink in. So, here are my terms. You have two options, and you have 24 hours to decide. I took a deep breath. Option 1. You both stay. But if you stay, things change. Immediately. You both need to find full-time jobs, and you need to contribute financially to this household. You will treat me with respect. Always. You will take responsibility for your own lives, your own meals, your own laundry, your own future. No more vague business plans from Marcus. No more expecting me to be your maid and ATM. This is a home, not a hotel. Marcus, though subdued, couldn't help but protest the time frame. Full-time jobs? In 30 days? That's impossible, Eleanor. Impossible? I raised an eyebrow. You're both educated adults who have lived rent-free for 5 years, eating my food and consuming my resources. 30 days is more than generous for you to find work and start contributing. Many people have to do it in far less time, with far less support. And option 2? Clara asked, her voice small, almost afraid. Option 2, I continued, is that you choose not to accept these terms. In that case, you will have 30 days to find your own place and move out. 30 days, effective immediately. Clara's tears began anew, a fresh wave of despair. But Mom, I'm scared. What if we can't find jobs? What if we lose you? What if our family falls apart? My response was quiet, but firm, rooted in the hard-won wisdom of a lifetime. Then don't let it, Clara. Make better choices. Treat people better. Take responsibility for your life, your marriage, your future. The choice is yours. This house, this family, it's not just my responsibility anymore. It's yours too. I saw the flicker of hope in her eyes, mixed with raw fear. But if we try, she ventured, and we fail? If you try, I reiterated, emphasizing the word, and you genuinely put in the effort, we'll figure it out together. That's what family does. But the trying, the genuine effort, that has to come from both of you. This is your chance, Clara, to decide what kind of life you want. So, you have until this time tomorrow to make your decision. Choose wisely. That night, sleep remained elusive, yet I felt a profound sense of peace. The exhaustion was still there, a physical ache in my bones, but it was overshadowed by a vibrant clarity. The pretense was over, the charade of their affection and my endless sacrifice finally shattered. I had spoken my truth, laid bare the injustice, and drawn a line in the sand. Whatever their decision, I knew I had reclaimed a piece of myself that had been lost for years. The next morning, Clara and Marcus appeared in the kitchen, both looking remarkably sleepless, their faces drawn and pale. The usual morning languor was replaced by a hesitant tension. We've decided, Clara began, her voice small, her eyes red-rimmed but earnest. We want to stay, Mom. We want to try. I looked at Marcus, his usual arrogant posture now slumped, his gaze fixed on the floor. Marcus? I prompted, my voice calm, but firm. Do you truly want to stay and uphold these new terms? Or are you simply trying to buy more time? I needed to hear it from him, clearly. Remember yesterday's words, Marcus, burden, dump, when you die. Are you prepared to genuinely earn back any semblance of respect after that? He shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my eyes. I'll try, Eleanor. I'll look for a job. I'll contribute. I'll Try to be more respectful. His words were delivered reluctantly, lacking genuine conviction. But it was the most I could expect at that moment. Clara, however, took a tentative step towards me, reaching for my hand. Her touch was soft, uncharacteristically gentle. "Mom," she said, her voice laced with a raw sincerity I hadn't heard in years. "I want to learn. I want to learn how to be a better daughter. I truly do." The look in her eyes was different, a plea for guidance rather than a demand for pity. I met her gaze, a tiny spark of hope flickering within me. "Then we begin," I said, pulling my hand away, but not unkindly. "These are the conditions. You both have 30 days to find full-time employment. Any job that pays. No more excuses about degrees or worthy positions. From the moment you start working, you will each contribute $400 a month to household expenses. You will both participate equally in household chores and maintenance. And," I paused, my voice dropping to a low, serious tone, "you will both treat me and each other with absolute respect. There will be no more insults, no more demands, no more assumption of entitlement. If these conditions are broken, even once, there will be no second chances. You will leave." The next few weeks were a strange blend of tentative progress and familiar frustrations. Clara, to my surprise, dove into job hunting with a newfound determination. She updated her resume, went to interviews, and actively sought out opportunities. She also started helping around the house without being asked, loading the dishwasher, taking out the trash, even raking the leaves in the backyard. It was small steps, but they were steps in the right direction. Marcus, on the other hand, went through the motions. He spent hours on his laptop, ostensibly looking for jobs, but I often caught him gaming or watching videos. He complained about every application he sent, every interview he landed. He maintained a veneer of outward politeness towards me, but his resentment simmered beneath the surface, a dark cloud that occasionally burst with a snide remark or a dismissive gesture towards Clara. 3 weeks later, Clara burst through the door, her face alight with genuine excitement. "Mom, I got it. Assistant manager at the new bookstore downtown. Full-time, with benefits." Her joy was infectious, and for the first time in ages, I saw a glimpse of the vibrant, hopeful daughter I remembered. "I'm going to save up, Mom," she added, her eyes shining, "and get my own place." Marcus's reaction was a stark contrast. He grunted from the sofa, clearly resentful of her success. He'd landed a part-time job at a warehouse a few days prior, complaining incessantly about the physical labor and the unworthy pay. His bitterness was palpable. 2 months into our new arrangement, I walked into the living room to find Marcus packing a duffel bag, his face a mask of sullen resentment. "I'm moving out," he muttered, avoiding my gaze. Crashing with a friend, Clara, sitting on the opposite sofa, her posture remarkably calm, looked up. "I'm staying, Mom," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I think my marriage has been over for a while now. I didn't want to admit it." Marcus left an hour later, without a goodbye, without a backward glance at me. He simply walked out the door, and out of our lives. I never heard from him again, though I later learned he moved back in with his parents. Clara and I sat on the porch that evening, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. She confessed how lost she had felt, how she had relied on Marcus's vague promises, on the idea of being taken care of, rather than finding her own strength. "I think I never truly loved him, Mom," she admitted, her voice soft. "I loved the idea of what he represented. Security. A future." Her eyes met mine, brimming with genuine sorrow and regret. "I am so sorry, Mom, for everything." Her apology felt real, a balm to wounds that had festered for too long. 6 months later, Clara, true to her word, moved into her own apartment, a small but charming place she was proud to call her own. We now have weekly dinners, not out of obligation, but out of genuine affection, rebuilding our relationship not as mother and dependent daughter, but as mother, daughter, and friends. My home is quiet now, filled with the gentle hum of my own peace. I've enrolled in a photography class, something I always wanted to do, and joined a book club. I'm making new friends, discovering new interests. The house is still mine, yes, but more importantly, so is my life. I reclaimed it from the brink, from the very people I loved, and in doing so, I found a strength I never knew I possessed.